Hello and welcome to Epidemiology and Application to Community Health and Nursing. Much of what we know today about illness and disease comes from over 160 years of science and research. Epidemiology offers community health nurses a specific methodology for assessing the health of aggregates. Epidemiology also provides a framework for research, which leads to improving clinical practice. Today's lecture will begin to dig a little deeper into the importance of epidemiology and discuss the history and associated concepts such as the epidemiologic triad and methods of data collection. Lastly, you'll learn how epidemiology applies to community health nursing. The term epidemiology is derived from the Greek language. Let's break the meaning down. Epi meaning upon, on, or befall. Demo meaning people, population, or man. And logos is the study of. Epidemiology, the study of anything that happens to people, that which befalls man. It is the science of prevention. This type of knowledge provides the community health nurse with a body of knowledge on which to base their practice and provides a method for studying new and existing health concerns. Defining epidemiology. The definition of epidemiology as defined by your Harkness and DeMarco text on page 107 is the study of the distribution and determinants of states of health and illness in human populations. States of health and illness include health, disease, morbidity, injuries, disability, and mortality. The goals of epidemiology. The goals of epidemiology include using the gathered information to control health problems. Doing so will maximize the health of the entire community and not just the individual. Overall, epidemiology limits illness within communities. Now we're going to discuss the history of epidemiology. The development of epidemiology as a science started with Hippocrates of Kos. He is thought to be the first epidemiologist and the founder of modern medicine. He is credited with examining how health in the community is influenced by personal characteristics, such as lifestyle patterns, or influenced by place, such as environment and geography, and how it is influenced by time, such as the seasons. Continuing on with our discussion on the founders of epidemiology, we have John Gaunt. He was the first to study disease patterns in populations. He found that deaths varied by seasons. He analyzed birth and death records and started the foundation of vital statistics. Next came along William Farr, a few years later, and expanded Gaunt's work. He is considered the founder of modern statistics, important to know, and developed a system for recording the causes of death and included information such as age, gender, and occupation in those statistics. Our next important historical figure in the history of epidemiology is John Snow. John Snow was best known in the 19th century. He is credited with being the father of epidemiology and for staying off a cholera epidemic. He used mapping and natural experiment, comparing rates in groups exposed to different water supplies. He discovered that contaminated water from a local water source was the mode of transition for cholera. Cholera is a bacterial disease spread through contaminated food or water, causing diarrhea and dehydration. Our last important historical figure in the history of epidemiology is Florence Nightingale, and you should all be familiar with her. Florence Nightingale is considered the founder of the nursing profession and was instrumental in initiating sanitary reforms that prevented disease and death. She demonstrated that by using statistics, a relationship between the conditions of the environment and the recovery time of soldiers was present. She was able to show that by improving conditions which were deplorable at that time, and the addition of nursing care, mortality rates diminished in soldiers. Truly, she's a pioneer in epidemiology. The community health nurse and epidemiologists alike use epidemiologic models as frameworks for health status investigation. The first model is an epidemiologic triad. Within the epidemiologic triad, the belief is that health status is determined by the interaction of characteristics of the host, agent, and the environment, and not by any single factor. As mentioned in the previous slide, the epidemiologic triad has three components: the host, agent, and environment. The interaction of these three elements determines the development and cessation of the disease. A host is a living thing or being affected by an agent. It can be a person, group, or an entire community. It can be variable or absolute. An example of absolute would be age, race, genetic makeup, or ethnicity. These characteristics cannot be changed. However, variable factors would include lifestyle, nutrition, motivation, and occupation. The agent can be an animate or inanimate object that causes disease. It's an element or force that can initiate or potentiate a health problem. There are three types of agents: chemical, such as drugs, toxins, or pollutants; physical, noise, temperature, or trauma; and infectious, such as viruses and bacteria. The last component is environmental, which is a surrounding or a setting that sustains or feeds the host. Some examples are biological environments, such as plants or animals; physical environments, light, heat, air, radiation, food and water supply; or social cultural, such as technology or access to healthcare and economic conditions. A change in one or more of the elements in the triangle can influence the occurrence of disease by increasing or decreasing a person's risk for that disease. Please refer to page 7 of your ATI text for more information on this topic. It's important for you to know and understand the components of the epidemiologic triad. The next epidemiologic model is the wheel of causation. The wheel of causation emphasizes the concept of multiple causations, while de-emphasizing the role of the agent as the sole cause of the disease. In this model, emphasis is on interplay of physical, biological, and social environments. Within the wheel, the relationship between the host and the environments mentioned above is the major determinant of health status. The next epidemiologic model we will discuss is the web of causation. The web of causation assists in identifying all possible factors or causes that either influence or prevent an illness. Like the wheel of causation, it de-emphasizes the role of the agent in explaining disease. However, it strongly emphasizes the concept of multiple causations. Not only does it provide a better understanding of the cause, but provides a framework for analysis. The web of causation identifies factors and interventions for modification, which is another aspect that differentiates it from the wheel of causation. Public health nurses use the web of causation to break the chain of events that lead to health problems. You'll need to know how to differentiate between the wheel of causation and the web of causation. This slide provides an example of the web of causation. Here, emphasis is placed on multiple causations in the illness or the disease. The illness or disease is obesity, and you can see there are multiple causes to this: lack of accessible resources, stress, loneliness, diet, living arrangements, lack of nutrition education. Again, the community health nurse or public health nurse uses this web to break the chain of events that lead to health problems. The final model is the conceptual model for natural history of any disease. It was developed in 1958. It integrated the pathogenesis of illness with primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention measures. The pathogenesis period of disease is the incubation period or time between what is causing or initiating the health illness or potentially going to cause and the onset of the illness. Next, the levels of prevention and the relationship to epidemiology. Primary prevention. Primary prevention aims at reducing the incidence of the disease or injury. Primary prevention is education-based. For example, smoking cessation programs, prenatal classes, nutrition education, and providing immunizations. Secondary prevention aims at early diagnosis, minimizing damage and limiting resulting disabilities. These are your health screenings, your mammograms, colonoscopies, blood pressure, hearing, sight screenings. It shortens the period of disability, cures and prevents disease, and prevents complications. The last level is tertiary. This is or are rehabilitation measures that enable the individual to function at his or her maximum capability. In order to maximize recovery period after illness, they focus on rehabilitation, such as physical therapy, support groups, case management, and cardiac rehab. Please see page 15 of your ATI text for nursing interventions based on primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention measures. Next, we will discuss applying epidemiologic principles in practice. Community assessment data can be useful in planning and implementing interventions. It can be applied to promote healthy lifestyles. By gathering information, nurses plan, implement health promotion and prevention programs. Implementing the program within the community addresses a health problem which has previously been identified and continues to promote healthy lifestyles. An epidemiologic model can be useful in preventing and controlling outbreaks of disease. Outbreaks can be epidemic, which is an increased incidence of the disease, or event that is beyond which is formally found in the population. Outbreaks are typically localized to a specific community or population. Community nurses are involved in educating the public, acquiring resources, and implementing control measures to prevent such outbreaks. Principles are put in motion by the public health nurse to evaluate the effectiveness of health services. The best way to evaluate effectiveness is to compare epidemiologic statistics before and after the implementation of health services. It's a continuous process of evaluation and modification. For more information on this, you may read up in your ATI text on page 6 under the heading Epidemiologic Process. Concepts in epidemiology. The basic concepts or tools of epidemiology are used by community health nurses so they can implement epidemiology effectively in the community setting. The basic concepts provide a baseline information for assessing needs, identifying problems that may exist, and designing strategies to evaluate the problem, developing a plan of care once priorities are set, and evaluating how effective the care was. The basic concepts of morbidity and mortality. Because epidemiology looks at the distribution of health states and events and are concerned about how they differ, it is important to measure morbidity and mortality. Both rely on rates and proportions. More about ratios, rates, and proportions in the next few slides. An example of a ratio or a basic concept is the proportional mortality ratio. It is defined as a ratio that compares deaths from a specific illness with deaths from all other causes. You can read more about this on page 122 of your Harkness and DeMarco textbook. This is not considered a rate of death. The term rate is defined on the slide as the primary method used to describe an occurrence or existence of a state of health in a specific group of people in a given time period. Rates can quantify the occurrence or incidence, or they can quantify the existence or prevalence of states of health and illness. Please know these terms from Chapter 7 of your textbook. Rates are the best indicators of risk of that specific disease, condition, or event will occur. They may also measure how quickly something is happening and deals with change. I provided an example on the slide. If you have 20 cases of cholera in a population of 100, this would be considered a high rate of incidence. But a low rate if there were only 20 cases in a population of 300,000. Incidence and prevalence. The incidence rate. A measure of the probability that people without a certain condition will develop that condition over a period of time. These are the new cases. A prevalence rate measures the number of people in a given population who have a specific existing disease or condition at a given point in time. Again, prevalence rate equals existing. Incidence rate are the new cases, the probability that they will develop a condition over time. The attack rate is a measure of the probability that people without a certain condition will develop a condition over a period of time. This may sound familiar because it is similar to an incidence rate. Only new cases are counted in an attack rate. Mortality rate is defined as the probability of death from any cause among the entire population within a given time frame. This rate provides information about diseases that are fatal and does not provide information about the level of existing disease or risk of getting the disease. Epidemiologic investigation has several goals and includes identifying the causal mechanisms of health and illness and developing measures for preventing illness and promoting health. Epidemiologists utilize an investigative process which involves descriptive and analytic studies. A descriptive study is defined as one in which information is collected to characterize and summarize a health event or problem. The study describes the distribution of disease, death, and other health outcomes in a population according to person, meaning who, place, where, and time when it happened. The studies are observational. There are two types of descriptive study, the case study and the cross-section study. The case study involves an in-depth analysis of an individual, group, or social institution. A cross-sectional study is a study in which a sample of persons from a population is enrolled, and their exposures and health outcomes are measured simultaneously. The study provides a snapshot of a population or group because the data represents one period in time. Historical information can be collected for this study through survey research, such as performing an exposure history on radiation. This is considered hypotheses generating research. The chart provides an understanding of how a cross-sectional study compares different groups or cross-sections of the population, providing a snapshot for that group. This group is followed over time and compared at different intervals. Now we'll talk about analytic studies. Analytic studies are a type of epidemiologic study. Analytic studies use comparisons between groups to determine the role of various risk factors in causing the problem. The goal is to discover the determinants of health outcomes, which is how and why. It is more specific than that of descriptive studies in their focus, and they test hypotheses or seek to answer specific questions. Analytic epidemiology deals with the factors that influence the observed patterns of health and disease. There are two types of analytic studies, cohort and case control. It is important to know the difference between the two. Cohort studies monitor subjects over time and find associations between risk factors and health outcomes. In a cohort study, often people are the focus of the study. Cohort studies attempt to find a cause and effect relationship. The cohort study is also considered a longitudinal study, meaning it occurs over time or the group is followed over time. Here, the cohort will be observed over time to evaluate which variables were associated with the development or non-development of the disease. I'd like to try to provide some clarification because I'm sure a lot of these studies are starting to sound alike. A cohort study may sound like a cross-sectional study. However, one is descriptive, the cross-sectional study, and one is analytic, the cohort study. The cohort study attempts to find a cause and effect relationship, whereas a cross-sectional study is better at finding relationships and not cause and effect. I hope that provides a little bit more insight. I do encourage you to read over these studies, and they start on page 139 of your Harkness and DeMarco text. A case control study is an analytic study that enrolls or studies one group of persons with a certain health problem and a group of persons without the health problem, considered the control group. It compares differences in exposures, behaviors, and other characteristics to identify and quantify associations, test hypotheses, and identify causes. Descriptive epidemiology. Choose all that apply. A key feature of a cross-sectional study is one that usually provides information on prevalence rather than incidence, is limited to health exposures and behaviors rather than health outcomes, is more useful for descriptive epidemiology than it is for analytic epidemiology, is synonymous with survey. Please go to the next slide. If you chose A, C, and D, you are correct. A cross-sectional study or survey provides a snapshot of the health of a population, so it assesses prevalence rather than incidence. As a result, it is not as useful as a cohort or case control study for analytic epidemiology. However, a cross-sectional study can easily measure prevalence of exposures and outcomes. The application of epidemiology in the community-oriented nursing. Nurses use the nursing process in the community setting. Evidence-based practice is facilitated through epidemiological knowledge gained by investigation, review of literature, and collecting data. Nurses are detectives searching for answers and clues. Finding the answer leads to health promotion and prevention, making our communities more knowledgeable and healthier. Some areas where nurses are involved in research are nurse epidemiologists, school nurses, communicable disease nurses, environmental risk communicators, and the infection control nurse. Lastly, it's important to understand the application of epidemiology to individuals in the community. Health-related changes in individuals will directly affect the health of their communities. Typically, the healthcare needs of the individuals and families represent common community-related problems rather than problems that are unique to an individual. Community members must have the support of the community where they live and healthcare providers within that area in order to decrease health-related problems. I hope today's lecture provided some insight and knowledge regarding the practice of epidemiology in nursing and its application to research, investigation of disease, and the promotion of health and wellness in communities. Please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to see me. Thank you and have a great day.